Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kelly Timko. I'm from Galbraith, and I'm going to be your host today for this event. Thank you for taking your time out and learning something new with us. All attendees have been placed on mute to avoid any background noise. So if you have any questions or you need any help, you can use the chat function to speak with me. Welcome to Cost versus Price, featuring our panel of speakers today. The session is brought to you by the Society of Cost Engineers, a professional organization for cost engineers designed to promote and assist the discipline of cost engineering through standardization, education, and certification, and also brought to you by Galbraith, creator of the SEER cost optimization platform that helps organizations view, analyze, and optimize agile and traditional project costs, schedule, and risk scenarios and their outcomes. You can find both companies on the web at societyofcostengineers.com or galbraith.com. Please stick around for the Q&A session at the end. This will be your opportunity to ask questions and make this presentation relevant to you. We'll also be providing a link in the chat window for a 2-minute post-event survey, and we will be providing contact information for our panelists as well. A video of today's session, when it's ready, will be found at galbraith.com. And I want to let you know that our next virtual lunch and learn will be announced by email, and you can also follow at Galbraith on social media channels for that announcement. Today's discussion is being recorded, and the video will be available for later viewing. We'll be sending the URL to all the registrants, and feel free to share that with any of your colleagues if you'd like. Let's go ahead and introduce our presenters for today. Our panelists are Gary Cokins, he's our moderator, and he's president of Analytics-Based Performance Management. Also joining us is Doug Hicks, president of DT Hicks & Co., and Doug Howarth, founder of Hypernomics, Matthew Smith, president and CEO of 3C Software, and Michael McNulty, a partner of Citron, a government contracting specialty advisory firm. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to Mr. Cokins.
Thank you, Kelly, for the introduction, and also to Jerry Collins, who is the founder, and I don't know if it's CEO, director of the Society of Cost Engineers. The link to the Society of Cost Engineers website is tiny, tiny in that red box, but it's www.societyofcostengineers.com. I'm going to show you the very last slide of Q&A. We'll have the email addresses so that you can directly communicate if there's not enough time for Q&A, or you want to directly communicate with any of the speakers. So that'll be at the end. So the format is I'm going to have each of us do a quick introduction of each other and a 30, 45-second sort of positioning statement, what they feel about cost versus price. Then I have a series of questions and we'll do a deep dive. So real quickly, myself, I'm Gary Cokins. I'm 73, feel like I'm 43. Career is 40 years, starting in industry, manufacturing, 27 years old, a division controller, and then 30 years of consulting with Deloitte, KPMG, EDS. And then I spent 16 years with SAS, the large analytics software vendor, undergraduate industrial engineering and operations research from Cornell University, MBA from Northwestern University, Kellogg. So Doug Hicks, let's have you go next.
Okay, I'm Doug Hicks, and I like to introduce myself as a recovering accountant. I became a CPA back in 1972, and every day since then, I've been trying to recover from being an accountant. I spent 13 years after that in industry as a financial executive. And then the last 37 years, I've been working with companies to develop the type of accurate and relevant cost information they need to support their business decisions, and getting as far away from the way accountants do costing for that purpose as possible.
And your position on cost versus price?
Oh, cost has nothing to do with price. It has everything to do with pricing decisions, but cost has absolutely nothing to do with what a price would eventually be. That's my position. It is one of the 3 rules, Hicks's rules of pricing.
Well done. Doug Howarth, you're next. Mute.
My bad. I didn't want to have any background noise. Sorry, everybody. Doug Howarth, Hypernomics, Inc. I was 31 years at the Skunk Works, where I a variety of things, leading the parametrics group there for over a decade. And before that, I was the F-117A manufacturing program manager. I got out of the skunk works about 11 years ago to follow what I discovered here in this new field I named Hypernomics, where we compare cost versus price versus demand, and made some interesting discoveries. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later throughout this discussion. Thank you.
Matthew Smith.
Hey, thanks, Gary. Again, welcome everybody, and thanks for having me here today and for attending. My name is Matthew Smith. I'm the president of 3C Software. We are the creators and implementers of Impact ECS Enterprise Costing System. Unlike Doug, I've not yet admitted it, so I guess I'm still an accountant. I haven't made it to that stage yet of recovery, but I've spent my whole career building costing models for manufacturing and service organizations in an effort to help them better and deeper understand their cost, and then take, of course, actions to correct or improve those costs. My position on the pros and cons, I guess, on price versus cost, I'm going to be much more of a cost guy, but I'm a lot like Doug in that one doesn't have anything to do with the other. And it can so much depend on the commodity market, right? To me, if you're in a particular market where the product's much more commoditized, then market pricing is going to have a lot more influence. If in another case, you're the maker of, let's say, Yeti coolers, and where I can buy a cooler for $60 or I can buy a cooler for $600, cost and price or market pressure doesn't mean so much. So it just depends on the market for me, but I certainly come at it from a cost standpoint, but understand there's no necessary correlation between the two.
Michael McNulty.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again for your time today. My name is Michael McNulty. I suppose, like a lot of you, I have a background in engineering. I'm an electrical engineer. Spent a bunch of years as an Army military intelligence officer. Got out and did a lap around the government contracting, the Beltway, Motorola, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, and so on. I went from engineering to program management to the business side of these companies, and really worked on capturing and winning business at these companies. I started my own business in 2002, focused on helping the big companies in the defense and aerospace market win government contracts. That focus then morphed over to a focus on competitive analysis and price to win analysis, which is really looking at the competition on a given bid, government contract bid, and trying to analyze the competitors and predict how they're going to play and what their bid prices will be. And in order to do that, if you're going to do that well, if you do a bottoms-up build on that, it is cost-based. And so we use parametric modeling tools. Shameless plug for Gallereth. We love their suite of tools. We use them. And it's been very successful. We've helped companies win north of $35 billion in the last 6-7 years alone. I sold a company to Citrin Cooperman this year in April. I'm now the managing partner for the group that does price to win analysis at Citrin Cooperman.
Very good. And sort of echo what Bearded Doug, I have two Dougs here, is I always like to say I'm an engineer masquerading as an accountant. Think like an engineer. So I'm going to have a series of questions here. And for Doug Howarth and Mike McNulty, the questions to them are going to let them do a deep dive into the world that they're in. The first few questions are going to be primarily for Doug Hicks and Michael McNulty, but Doug Howarth and, Doug Hicks and Matthew, but the other two can chime in on the answers. So let's start with the first question. What are those pros and cons of setting a price? Either one, based on what the market will bear, versus cost plus, meaning determine at the beginning of a new product development, what is all the cost, and then mark it up 10%. What's the pros and cons of those two fairly diverse ways of establishing a price? Start with Doug Hicks.
Well, the only pro I can see to rolling up your costs and adding a profit is that you're likely to get jobs that you do make some money on. The con is you'll miss out on a lot of jobs where maybe you can make a lot more money on. And if your cost calculations aren't correct, well, you're going to be in trouble anyway. Again, to me, the biggest disadvantage is the fact that you're not expanding your price when you can get more than that. And you're not understanding what kind of return you can still get, even if you're not hitting your target margin. Because in the long run, you're managing a portfolio of business. You're not necessarily trying to hit the same number on every job. And you may have some that are a little less than others. And so you may want to take some of the jobs that were less than your target markup in order to enhance your portfolio of business, because you got to keep using your investment. Your objective is a return on investment. And it's not as simple when you're pricing things as saying, I got to get an X% margin on everything. So again, the drawback is looking at that.
Okay, and Matthew. Whoop. Yeah, being the moderator here, I'm going to keep us disciplined. Matthew Smith.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I think as most people say, or most people in here are going to agree, that there are pros and cons with both, right? I go back to what I said in the beginning, in that the market that you're serving will have a lot of impact here, right? If you're much more of a commodity producer, then certainly you need to be more aware of competitive opportunities, and price is going to have, or market rather, is going to have much more of an influence on setting your price than cost is. And if you're not able to make margin, the required margin, then you either need to exit the business or go deal with your cost and get your cost down, right? Which is another way of saying what Doug's doing. If your investment in those assets can't return the margin that the owners and shareholders demand, then you either got to get out of that business or you got to go find some way to get those costs down, right? So certainly the cost plus approach, the con to it is, I'll echo again what Gary said, you're going to miss out on a lot of opportunities. If you ask most people running commercial organizations, meaning the sales and marketing guys, who will slam their fist and say, we got to get 20% margin or we're not taking the business. If you ask them, hey, would you take 19.5% margin? They say, yeah, we'll take 19.5. Yeah, we'll take that, right? So the truth is that cost plus can cause you to lose out on a lot of opportunities that you might otherwise take. So knowing the full, that doesn't mean to me, though, I guess it still depends on the market, that not knowing your cost is an excuse, right? You really need to fully understand the cost, so that even if it's the market setting your prices, you need to understand what kind of margin that's going to give you, because it could still be a business you shouldn't be in if your costs aren't aligned to that, right? I mentioned it just earlier. I go back to, everybody's probably familiar with Yeti coolers these days, right? Nobody could believe you could go charge the amount of money for a cooler. I'm talking about an ice chest, right? A cooler that Yeti gets for these coolers. And certainly it's not based on their cost at all, but they found a way to set their market price in the band that they wanted to be in. And you can buy, a cooler at a tenth the price of what they get for their coolers, yet they're a leading seller of coolers. So that's good evidence that cost isn't always the way to approach market pricing, right?
Okay. So
Gary, can I just throw in one other comment? And there's also a difference, because Matt mentioned the difference in your market. If you're in the government contracting business, cost plus becomes more of an issue, because based on my experience with government, they're a cost reimbursement market versus a market price market. And so they want you to recover your cost and make a small profit, as opposed to in the commercial marketplace where you actually are competitive bidding things.
Okay, so moving on to question 2, although I want to put in a little plug. Both of you have basically said the importance of understanding cost, and this is more of a personal thing. I have quite a bit of expertise, as do many of the panelists, in activity-based costing. And people who think activity-based costing doesn't work or it's too complicated just have misconceptions. Compared to the butter spreading of overhead allocations, that just basically is unacceptable. ABC is the, I think, proven tool. So question number 2, since both of you basically advocate pricing to the market, what factors should be considered in setting the price? Start with Doug Hicks.
Well, it's sort of difficult to say the factors in setting the price, because that's sort of a market-related thing. Again, is it separating costs from market? You know, there'll be uniquenesses of any marketplace to determine setting the price. But there's also things you can do internally to analyze that. I had a client in the automotive industry that actually developed some kind of a psychological analysis of the people who, the buyers who bought their stuff. And they began to understand how they viewed what acceptable price would be. They saw the people who might let them mark up material a whole lot, even if they didn't add value. And they could get a great return on investment on that kind of stuff because they'd be marking up their value added a lot. And they saw other guys who didn't go that way. And they could manipulate their own pricing, even using cost information by analyzing their buyers. In other cases, I think it's matter of sales and marketing people do something besides wine and dine people and take them to the ball game. Yeah, to bring back enough intelligence to be able to do that. And some bigger companies, they probably have departments that do a lot of analytics now, and they understand that. And I know in a lot of marketing areas, they would just humiliate accountants with this that they're able to do. But in a lot of the businesses I've dealt with, they basically haven't a clue as to what's going on other than their gut feel, their time in the market. And having their sales guys be able to bring them back intelligence is important, which they seldom do. They just bring them back messages from the customer. So, you know, one of the things I looked at in the small and mid-sized businesses I work at is having them have greater participation of sales and marketing people on gathering the information of what is the market price. Because unless they're published somewhere, they're difficult for people to gather and understand what they are. I have had clients who did an effective job of fishing for market prices, where they would take their cost and keep marking them up a little until they started not getting work. And I've had one number of years ago who increased their margins by 3 or 4% over about a year by taking costs once they understood them. And then saying, well, what if we added 11% instead of 12? Then what if we added 12%? And they look at their kill rates. And until the kill rates started to drop, they kept doing it. So again, that's one of the approaches some people can take. But ideally, you understand the market.
Okay, Matthew, what factors should be considered, considered in setting a price?
Yeah, what Doug wrapped with, understanding the market's got to be the number one consideration, right? You've got, if you're pricing to the market, you better understand the market, right? But there are a lot of things that we've touched on along the way that would go into a list of specific factors. One is, you know, required return on assets. Can you make it or not if you've got that kind of environment you're working in? Another is the overall capacity level and demand that your assets are under. I might make a decision in slow times that I wouldn't make in high rolling times where I've got lots of demand and lots of buyers for my products. But again, that's industry specific. Some people, you know, if I'm a big, heavy asset intensive pulp and paper manufacturer, I got to keep the paper machines running, right? And in down markets, I'll take deals that I won't take in demanding markets, right? So capacity and demand might be a factor. If you've got the types of customers that buy a variety of goods from you, then looking at the overall basket of goods, as I coin it, right? What's the overall return on it? What products are keeping me in there, even at a less than desirable margin that keeps the competitor out? So this customer buys my other products at the same time. You've got to weigh all of that into the overall customer profitability, right? So that would be a factor in setting the price. And I would take a product at a price from a customer that gives me a good return on a basket of goods than I would someone just cherry picking one SKU when I have it discounted or when the market's down on it, right? Those are some of the things that would go into, but still, while it might not be a factor in setting the price the way you've asked it, I have to know my cost, right? I got to look back and know what my costs are, not maybe to set it, but to know if I'm going to play in that market or not, right? So one of the factors is the cost, right? What can I competitively and at a certain quality produce this product or source this product for? I have to know that, right? So it still was a factor in setting the prices, knowing what my true costs are. No substitute for that to me.
Okay. So the next two questions are exclusively for Doug Howarth and Michael McNulty. So we'll start with Doug. How does price differ from value and cost? Now we get into semantics here. Where did value fit in?
Yeah, we've made a distinction in our company between the cost, value, and price of products. So the price is obviously the number that's stamped on a product. The cost is what it took you to build the product. But the value turns out that this is actually determined by the market. And rather than being some sort of fuzzy concept that one can't, hope to ever discover, in most markets that we've analyzed, and this includes everything from ground beef to train travel to spaceships, it works out that the market collectively has responses for features that it likes. So in computers, for example, it assigns a certain value to the capacity. It assigns a certain value to the speed. It assigns a certain value for the comfort of the computer. The same thing happens in cars and spaceship travel. We're seeing that already. And it turns out that you can take these factors, and sometimes you have to go out and maybe guess at what the factors are and then start doing the same kind of regression analysis that we do for cost analysis, which is to say you go out and take a variety of factors, things that relate to speed and capacity and range and duration and things like that, and then take several column headings that you want to ferret out in a data set, and they get all the observations you can possibly muster for a group, and then start to fill in this matrix with all that information. And then one can figure out, as you pull the data out, what it is that the customers want. And very often the value is quite a bit different than the cost. And this is, we never encourage anybody to do cost plus in our industry. We always want to go with the value. And the other thing too is that there's another limiting factor here, which is the demand. And we study demand in great detail. And it works out that you can get the value exactly right, which is to say you've approximated what the market will pay for it correctly. And you can get the cost exactly right. But if you get the demand wrong, which is to say if you overshoot the demand, you're not going to make any money. So for example, right now, the A380 made by Airbus, the world's largest airplane, just stopped production at 251 units. Well, what they did 20 years ago when they were launching this product in 2000 is they went around and they did a survey of all the customers that they had in their wheelhouse. And they said, what would you like? What's the cost per seat mile? And what are we going to do? And they got all these answers, and they came up with a survey, and they said, we're going to get a certain number of units. And then they discounted that. And they say, well, we're going to have 1,250 units. But that's not the way the market works. The market's got a firm limit on what it can buy at any one point in time. And knowing what that limit is crucial. We've discovered and been able to figure out a viable product. So we take the value as quite a bit different than the cost, and then we throw in demand on top of that. So that's what we do here.
Okay. You're reminding me of the old college textbook with the cost volume mix break-even curves, demand, fixed cost, variable, all of that. So in my preparation with Michael McNulty, he mentioned the word parametric modeling, and I'm like, God, I think I remember that in one of my courses at Cornell, but that was 40 years ago. So Michael, can you describe how you use parametric modeling in building competitive cost models?
Sure. Yeah. So, we use parametric tools to build cost-based engineering models for government projects. So an example might be a large network operations center, or maybe a manufacturer of a command and control system, or even a flight simulator. And so what does that really mean? It means the government wants to build this thing, or many of these things, and the contractors are bidding on that. And so we're hired by our customers to predict what their competitors are going to do. So if we're going to do that, then we need to get inside sort of the idea of, well, if a company like Lockheed or Northrop or General Dynamics is going to build something, then what are they building that from? So there's an engineering design component, there's a development period, there's, development, integration, test, deploy, maybe manufacturing, and so on and so forth. All of those steps and activities and workloads can be properly estimated using parametric modeling tools. So Galrath, I mentioned before, and they're our sponsor today. We use a whole suite of their tools. So we use their SIM tool for software. We use their CRIT tool for IT environments. We use manufacturing. We use hardware. All of those help us build a model of the deal that we're working on. One deal at a time, network operations center or flight simulator. We build a model of that. And it's really the workload and materials associated with doing that work. We're often asked to do design to cost work, DTC, on the way to price to win. DTC is, if you haven't run into it a whole lot, is the simple concept that we engineers will overprice everything we can just because we want no risk, right? So, and we might try to solve cold fusion along the way, even though it's not in the in the specs.
Yeah, the customer will pay for it. Why not?
Sure. But of course, that's not a winning approach. That'll get you in a lot of trouble if you're running out of time because you can't get the price down or the cost down fast enough or associated price down fast enough to get it in the proposal to make a winning proposal. So DTC is often used early on to build those costs, build those models early on to say, okay, what are the pieces and what are they going to cost so we stay inside the box. But once we have the cost nailed down, then we need to apply indirect expenses, overhead G&A, fringe, and fees to get to a price model. But that's not necessarily a winning deal yet because everybody's kind of doing the same thing. Everybody, especially in a cost reimbursable environment like the government. And even if it's fixed price, the government contractors are very, very keen on making sure they understand their costs before they put in a bid. So once we've got that built, then we can play around with the models. We can start playing around with, risk-based adjustment to the price based on the mechanics of the deal. For instance, let's say, something like a network operations center is going to have a tremendous amount of material. And those materials may be greatly discounted if they're being bought in volume by a very large government contractor. All of that can be adjusted and modeled in our models to approximate the reality of what the bids will be, not just what we think they'll be. And so we use those various levers and tools to help adjust and explore what we think, the various contractors will bid. And it's very important. We're very interested in, if you've got a publicly traded large government contractor and you look at their 10K and you can see what their margins are, you can imagine yourself as an executive in the final pricing review, getting ready to put a bid into the Air Force for multiple hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars. They have figured out what their cost basis is. They know what their price and their margin is going to be. And then they also, for their bid, and also they know they're planning on what's going to happen operationally. So we're modeling all of that using parametric modeling tools, cost-based, and of course priced, because that's what you've got to submit to the government.
Yep.
Okay. Hey, let's move on to a topic called target costing. And my sort of very simplistic definition of target costing is you first determine what is the price that a customer will pay based on features and functions. And then you basically want to have some profit left over, 5-10%. So if you take that target price, if you will, or subtract that profit, that gives you the maximum allowable cost. And this is primarily for new product development. So now the challenge is, as the product is being developed, prototyping, even off the drawings, if that cost in the very beginning exceeds the maximum allowable cost, ain't going to work. So you got to put pressure on how do I basically streamline different materials, lower price materials, and so on and so forth, till you kind of like meet that formula, if you will, that the estimated cost is at or below the maximum allowable cost. So now my question is, how prevalent is the practice in companies using target costing compared to the good old easy cost plus? Trying to get a sense of, you know, is it 90% of companies use target costing, or 10%, or somewhere in the middle? Start with Doug Hicks.
I haven't run into, again, in my group of companies that I deal with, which are primarily, you know, 500,000 employees or less. I haven't dealt with many who use target costing as a way to start the process. I've seen a lot of them who have target costing used by their customers, who then come and use it to hammer them for price decreases. And one of the issues I see when it comes to target costing is people have a cost should be, but the people who are making the product don't have a good way to calculate what the actual cost is. And so you're taking a rather sophisticated, detailed way of coming down from the features and what they're worth and what it should cost to actually be able to provide those features, and then having somebody use a plant-wide overhead weight based on labor to figure out what a cost is. They have no idea on how to match them against those costs. And then the problem comes when a cost engineer from a customer comes, and then he's working with a vendor to be able to try to reduce their cost, which is, again, the setting in which I run into this the most. In many cases, the cost engineer is talking in terms of material labor burden and SG&A, and the customer, the vendor, is talking in the same terms. And you've got two people talking a language that has nothing to do with what it is they're talking about. Yeah, they're both speaking in these great generalities about specificities, and they really have no idea of the impact of many of the things they're doing. You know, it's sort of like two blind guys explaining how beautiful something is. It's very difficult for those conversations to take place. That's where I see a real disconnection in the target costing world, is where the people don't have the language to be able, and the measurements actually, to be able to execute what the purpose of it is, because they can't measure well enough.
Okay, Doug. Let's go to Matthew. How prevalent?
I don't see, Gary, I don't see target costing a lot in my clients. I do see it in a couple of specific industries, and I'll give you a couple of examples where I think companies employ target costing and thus pricing very successfully. One is like a consumer electronics company. They make a particular product that's the high end of their range and has a certain set of features to it. And then purely from the marketing side, they come out and say, hey, we want to fill this gap in the market between that highest feature-based product and the next one down. We think there's space in between there. So we want to do it with this little bit less resolution, little bit less hard space. So they'll come at it from a target costing standpoint, really meaning they've got a target price. And then, as you described, they've reduced what the required margin is for profit and SG&A and said, all right, this is the cost point that we think we could be successful. So I worked with a couple of electronics companies who, on their engineering teams, they do that. And that exercise, interestingly enough to me, and touched on something Doug said, happens in an engineering department, not in a cost accounting department. It doesn't happen out on the shop floor making the product, right? I mean, it's this world that just swirls around between commercial and engineering, just trying to downgrade or maybe even upgrade, but usually I've seen it as a downgrade to be able to put a product similar to their high feature product, but with a little bit less at a certain point, right? I've also seen what Doug described, where I have a lot of customers who are manufacturers that sell goods into the big retail chains like Walmart's and the clubs, right? Like Costco's and BJ's and Sam's Clubs. And and the customer will come to them and say, hey, I want a product on the shelf at this price point. Now that's the customer wants it at his price for his customer. So you start backing all that out, and let's just use Walmart as an example. That's what I'm going to walk into Walmart and pay for it. Now Walmart needs some margin and some handling cards. Now the supplier needs some margin and SG&A coverage. So the target cost is way down from that. So I have seen plenty of examples where my customer says, hey, we need to design, or can we design a product that Walmart can put on the shelf for $4.99, right? And it's used there. There's this other thing that's been happening that you might have seen in the news. Some of the retail chains like the Dollar General or Family Dollar, if they have those types of stores in your geography, where people start messing around with packaging sizing, and they come up with what I'd call non-normal packaging sizing. Like take something like milk, for example. We all know the normal sizes you typically buy milk in, right? Gallons, half gallons, quarts, or pints, something like that. As a consumer, as a retailer, I have seen some of my customers take what is a bulk product and get asked by their customers to just at the packaging stage try to invent a new product. And they come at it from a target price and a target cost, right? But they're trying to fill some gap or maybe trick the market or something like that and trying to jump in. But they approach that with a target price and thus cost in mind up front when they started, right?
Okay.
And that's just a real packaging play at the end, almost just trying to invent a little market space that's not there.
Okay. Hey, because I'm running a little behind on my questions, Doug Howarth and Mike McNulty, I'm going to skip you on the how prevalent, do you see it? I want to address the next question that you two can start answering, and that are, what are some of the issues that accountants have in calculating costs? And that could go from dirty data, low quality data, overhead cost allocations. What are some of the issues we're really talking about reasonable accuracy. I didn't say perfect accuracy, precision and accuracy. What are some of the issues the accountants have in how to calculate costs? Let's start with Doug Howarth. You're muted. Okay, there you go.
Well, first of all, at least at Lockheed Martin and also in our company, we don't have the accountants figuring out the cost. We have the parametric estimators figuring out the cost. Okay. And one of the problems we had back at Lockheed was, and this is no secret, is that they didn't assign tracking numbers to the various groups down to the level that we would like to see it in order for us to be able to work out estimates at that level. So the data, in a word, was muddled. It was dirty. It wasn't what you wanted to see. So that's a problem. Also, too, you can have a lot of cost data that relates to the products that you're building, but sometimes, or very oftentimes, one doesn't see the data that relates to the people that you've put to the product. So, for example, the Lockheed Martin people made it was Lockheed back in the day, they made the SR-71, and before that, the A-12. And very surprisingly, the A-12 was, by most accounts, on price or below cost. And of course, this was a groundbreaking a vehicle, the first vehicle to hit Mach 3. It used titanium, had never been used before at altitude. A lot of things that you couldn't figure out easily, this team did. And the reason they did is that Kelly Johnson had assembled a team of some of the best people in the world. And that team had more expertise than the other teams did. And they managed to build stuff faster than anybody else could. And so the one extra thing that's lacking from a lot of the accountants' ways of doing it is the teams that you bring to bear on it. Now, having said that, there are some software platforms, software estimating platforms, the ones developed out of USC, that do take into account what the estimator's abilities are. But that's the only one I've seen, and we need to be able to have more of that to be able to get more accurate costing.
Okay, Michael McNulty, what are the issues with accountants in calculating reasonably accurate costs?
Well, I have to go with Doug a little bit on what the accountant's involvement is on engineering projects. I think they can kind of count the costs after they're incurred. I don't know that they're able to count the costs on the front end. From my experience, the work up front of estimating the cost of a project are associated with good engineering estimating and getting good data from vendors, suppliers, and so forth for that particular project. Also taking a look at historical actuals associated with these types of projects. The projects that Doug were talking about are very, very complex systems that, are sort of unique. A lot of the work that's done by companies that we work with, companies in the space, are doing a lot of projects they've done before, some form of that. right? They're upgrading a radar, they're building some more radars, or they're building a new a new robot that they're going to use in a wartime situation. Those robots are based on existing robots that have been built before. Now there's a delta. So it's really an engineering estimating and costing process. Again, though, it's tricky because, we've seen a lot of situations where the technology is too expensive and it's not competitive. So the costs are prohibitive. So you've got this really sexy robot that's got an arm that can do all kinds of wild things, and it's too expensive, and the other guys win. So that's an example of not being able to understand and manage costs and ultimately be competitive.
Okay,
something we
Let's
see a
move
lot of.
on. Okay.
Yep.
I'm going to probably have Doug Hicks speak for Matthew on this, since Matthew's company produces activity-based costing software, although Matthew, you can chime in, but Doug, what are the problems that accountants have in calculating costs?
Well, the biggest problem I find is that accountants live in a box, and they don't realize there's a universe outside the box. That box is general accepted accounting principles and the rules and regulations that are designed for external financial reporting. If they get out of the box and take a deep breath and look around, they can see that there's other ways to measure cost, that the correlation that's allowable in financial reporting is not adequate for decision-making. You need causality in decision-making. Causality is basically the basis of ABC. And so it's crawling out of that box. They just don't see things. They see the world as things you have to convert to the rules and regulations they have. In the last chapter of one of my books, I talk about how I would never hire an accountant to do my cost information. I hire an engineer or mathematician because they try to describe the world in mathematical terms. Accountants try to take the world and squeeze it into the mathematical terms I already have. And to me, that's the biggest difference. The rest of them sort of cascade out of that particular difference.
Yeah, let me jump in just quickly, Gary, because I feel like somebody's got to take up for us just a little bit. I would start by saying, at least in my customer base, we do have a lot of accounts that are doing very, very good cost work, right? First and foremost, right? But there are areas where it's lacking, and something that both of you, both Michael and you, Doug Hicks, you touched on is one of the challenges is bandwidth and resources. When I started doing this even 30 years ago, I would go to a textile plant, for example, for a costing project. There would be a cost accountant and 2 IEs on the team with us. If I go to that same plant today, there's one cost person, and maybe they have responsibility for 2 other plants. So they've lost a lot of the resources and the bandwidth in these manufacturing facilities that I visit to have somebody who has the time and the knowledge and the expertise to study cost. Even if they can get outside the box, they don't have the bandwidth because, oh, by the way, we want you to work outside the box, Doug, but at the same time, we got that month-end report you got to get produced because the market's going to demand it. So I think bandwidth and resources and attracting people into the industry. I mean, a lot of the manufacturing plants that I go visit quite regularly and have visited for years are in not very attractive metropolis areas, and trying to find people who want to come there and walk that floor every day once they've earned an accounting degree and understand the ins and outs and yield and setup times and all those things. It's just not there anymore. And the IEs that used to help them understand those times and what's going on, they've disappeared from a lot of these plants as well. So now I'm talking about an environment where you're manufacturing goods and you're trying to understand and improve your cost. Doug, Howarth, and Michael both, you're talking engineering on the front end. I think that's an engineer's game, right? I think the accountant's going to play some models out, but I agree with you guys. I think the accountant isn't the guy that comes up with the quantity in the bill of material. That's the engineer's job, right? Applying the quantity times the price to get the cost. That's something an accountant should be expected to do. But I think we need to separate, what creating new costs for new products and projects, like Michael's talked a lot smartly about, that's an engineer's world 100%, right? But in the plants, there's still a lot of good cost work happening. And I think if these guys had, even an IE, to share across plants that used to be there that aren't there anymore, they could get even better. And then the last thing I'll say is, in practice, if you talk about what we're doing wrong as a practice, I think it's what Gary talked about earlier, which is peanut butter spreading of SG&A, or only focusing on COGS and not getting below gross margin, to understand how certain products will still drive specific cost even outside of cost of goods sold, right? The way they're handled, the way they're stored, the way they have to be shipped. I have a large glass manufacturer that making the glass, which is what goes into COGS, is only part of the picture when you talk about the packaging and the handling and the distribution to try to keep that thing from breaking till it gets there, right? And that's cost that for this company was well below gross margin, wasn't even part of COGS, right? So yeah, there's still a lot of room, but we're doing some good work.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, one of the incentives to interest in activity-based costing today is actually customer profitability, going below the product gross profit margin line to include distribution, selling expenses, marketing expenses, cost to serve, a P&L by customer. Because marketing and sales, you know, the questions they're asking is what type of customer is most attractive to acquire, to grow, to retain and win back? Which types are not?
Gary, it's worth noting, I have done many projects where we start with the gross margin of a product already calculated. And then from there, I can show you where one product maintains the majority of that gross margin all the way through, and the other one absolutely obliterates it as a loser. And you would not know that without looking below gross margin at the handling, the transportation, what it takes for storage. I've got products that take inspection and certification right on how you're storing it, right? And that eating up, if you will, of that gross margin by product is something you have to look at.
Yeah, and then there's customer behavior. You know, the old classic devil customers and angel customers, high demanding customers who cause you so much extra work, you know, that they wrote. Doug, your nickname for devils and angels is what? Sweethearts and
jerks.
There you go. Okay, let me go to Doug Howarth and Michael McNulty, and then we'll have a little time for Q&A because I think Kelly's going to be monitoring the chat box. What are the barriers? We'll start with Doug Howarth. What are the barriers and obstacles that companies struggle with that prevent them from basically adopting these sort of progressive methods?
Well, what we've noticed in our industry, there's a whole trend towards not invented here. So we're telling people, we come to people with the idea that cost, value, and demand exist in this framework that you haven't seen before. And if you understand how they work, you can optimize profitability. And we were told when we went to UCLA that they wouldn't take anything that hadn't been in industry for 10 years. So at the time it was 9 years. Now it's 11. Maybe they'll take it now. But there's a whole trend just towards keeping what you know and going with what you know and not opening your mind up to other views. So our view happens to look at markets in 4 mathematical dimensions at the same time. That's what we start with. And it turns out that some people just don't want to take the time to take a look at that. And that's something that we need to be able to overcome if we're going to be able to get more people to make more products profitably. So the obstacles that some of these clients who won't listen run into, for example, would fall into 2 or 3 major categories. One would be that they don't believe that their product is worth more than they're going to sell it for. Other people have touched on this before, but it turns out that if you look at all the features in a product field, say, for example, helicopters, that a helicopter might be worth $1.3 million. And maybe you've done some cost analysis and you say, well, we can build it for $700,000. Let's just sell it for $1 million. We'll make lots of money. And well, somebody did that. They built a helicopter for less than the cost and they sold it for $1 million. And we discovered 10 years ago that it was worth $1.3 million, but they sold it for $1 million. And we see now the used models going for 1.5 to 1.7 million, validating our point. So they didn't want to change their way of approaching the problem simply because they've been in that mode before.
Okay, Michael McNulty, obstacles and barriers slowing the adoption rate. You're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, I think, one of the biggest problems in government contracting is where we work is the audit function of the government. The government is set up to audit the accounting structure of government contractors in a certain way. So they're looking for how they allocate costs, how they allocate indirect costs. There's a model for that within DCAA and so on. And so the auditors are trained to do that. They're not trained to do, for instance, activity-based costing. That would be different for them. It's not unallowable. In fact, it might be a competitive advantage if a company can figure out a way to get their audit, to do that activity-based costing and get it through audit, so that they're more competitive in their bidding practices. But definitely old school when it comes to the government viewing how companies are doing. Now, the other part of this, a little bit different, is what will the market bear? It's very hard to go into a government contracting environment and say, look, I've got this thing and it's a lot better than the other guys, and I want you to pay more for it because you really want it, and it is literally better, and it is. These environments are very budget constrained, and the customer who's building requirements and putting out an RFP has to really recognize that even if they get a better widget, if the other widgets meet the requirements and the price is a lot lower, it's very, very difficult to go forward and go upstairs and say, look, we want to pay $50 million for this thing, more than anybody else. And everybody else, or a couple other companies, built a perfectly acceptable item that meets all the requirements. I mean, it's taxpayer money. They want to be careful with it, and they're probably not going to do it. So it's very difficult to change minds to go to a value-based, any kind of value-based pricing for government work.
Okay. Hey, so let's move on. Kelly, you told me that one of the registrants asked you a question prior to the event. Can you share what that question is?
Sure. What is a major obstacle or barrier preventing companies from providing effective management accounting information?
So now this is a little different than that last question. What are the barriers? Why, that's slowing from just doing good advanced management accounting? And I'll start with one. It's resistance to change. It's human nature. I think Doug Howarth kind of touched on it a little bit, that not invented here, but if we really take it to the psychological level, it's resistance to change. I always like to say only babies like change, diapers, but it's human nature. People like the status quo, but there's some other barriers. So let me start with Doug Hicks. What are some of the other barriers preventing organizations from using progressive management accounting methods, not just activity-based costing, but some of the others?
Well, I think part of it is that, again, the universities have taught people to be financial accountants. And they've given them a little tiny course on the side of the stepchild course of cost accounting. And when they get into industry, they're not ready to do the thinking required in management accounting. They're again using the repetition and the application of rules. And management accounting is an art more than a science. You're looking at how a business operates, and you're trying to come up with the math that reflects a good model of how that business operates. And it can't be taken off a shelf, and it can't be a paint by the number thing. And that's part of the problem, is you got to use some creativity, experience, understanding to be able to mold these things. And the other thing is that the demands of financial accounting are driven by law. If you got a choice of developing a better cost model or filing something that you might go to jail if you don't file it, well, there's not much of a choice. And so, that as long as those demands are there, unless somebody's really passionate about it, which unfortunately I have some clients that have been, who will go on their own time and on overtime, unpaid overtime, to do the kind of stuff they need for management accounting. Unless you got those kind of people, they're going to say, hey, it's 5 o'clock, I'm going home, I don't have time to do this.
Okay. Hey, we only have 6 minutes left, and I know Kelly wants to wrap up a couple minutes. So let me just, well, I'll let any of you chime in, just drop on your own. What's a major obstacle, or as Kelly asked the question, a lesson learned to get this stuff implemented?
Yeah, resources and timing, which Doug just touched on, right? I'm swamped with trying to get what I have to get done, so I don't have time to go do this other thing that would be fun to do. So resources, I feel, in the manufacturing environments and the cost accounting groups, resources are just highly constrained. And then there's a lack of training, as Doug mentioned as well, of this management accounting versus the financial accounting, right? Big difference.
Yeah. Anyone else? Doug, Howarth, or Michael?
I think you still struggle a little bit since no one jumped in of the siloed organizations. I see a lot of people working on pricing. They would never go talk to the costing people, and the costing people just never go talk to the commercial guys, which is absurd, right?
You know, some of the ones that come to my mind is fear of knowing the truth, or fear of others knowing the truth, fear of being measured, fear of being held accountable. I'll say it, weak leadership. Not every executive team's got the highest IQ. And you'll notice the examples that I gave and you gave have really nothing to do with systems or software or technology. It's really about people.
That's right. That's right.
I think, in my experience, a lesson learned is don't underestimate how important behavioral change management is. How do you get buy-in? And, you know, most engineers and accountants, I call them their Newtonians, like Isaac Newton. You know, the world's a big machine. Give me the levers, the pulleys, the dials. You've got to think a little Darwinian, like Charles Darwin. It's an organism, sense and respond. So I'll throw it back to Kelly to conclude the event, and I'll do a quick thank you here to everyone that has attended.
Great. Gary, you want to throw up that slide, the Q&A slide that has the contact information on there? And so we have time for some Q&A right now, and we do have a few questions that have come in. Before I dive into those, I want to let you know that I've dropped in a link in the chat to the little 2-minute post-event survey, and it also has the panelists' contact information in it. So you take a moment to click on that survey link. We'd appreciate that. Okay, so here are a couple questions that have come in. All right, let's see the first one. What are good alternatives to ABC when we are getting most of the parts and assemblies outsourced, just performing assemblies in-house? If parametric is the alternative, would the previous basis in data affect our overall estimate, and how do you address the problem?
Gee, I'll start, and then I'm going to throw it to Michael McNulty. First of all, you know, you can have 2 or more coexisting costing systems. It's okay to have multiple costing systems. And I have a sense, and I'm speaking for Michael and then maybe Doug, I think in the parametric, in the types of calculations they're doing, there is activity-based principles, as Doug referred to the causality principle, cause and effect relationship. It's a consumption. So let me go, Doug and Michael, how would you answer that question? Doug, you're muted.
Doug Howarth? Well, I would go and see what the thing that's most closely related to the thing that you're trying to estimate, and see if you have some data on that, and then try to make analogies from what you have to what it is that you need. Very often you can't see exactly what it is that you have in front of you, but through analogy, you can often find the same relationship. For example, if you take a look at the stock market, every day there's a frontier to the stock market, the S&P 500. So if you looked at the daily volume of the stock market, you would find that the slope of that curve, the outermost points, is very close to the slope of all the volume of all those stocks, you know, for all the ownership of the stock. So there's a proxy that comes from being able to see the total ownership versus the daily volume. And so the same thing happens in a lot of the projects that we're doing. You look at a proxy for what it is that you're trying to do, and then apply it to what it is that you're doing.
Okay. Hey, Michael, I'm going to not have you, excuse me, answer, because I just think it's a professional courtesy to end on time and not go 1 minute.
No worries.
So I really appreciate the participation of all the panelists. Kelly, you can do some concluding remarks, and then I think we're off in 30 seconds here.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Gary. All right, well, just a big thank you to all of our panelists today, and it was a great discussion. And please take a moment to click on the chat for the survey link, and feel free to contact anyone on our panel or myself if you have further questions or comments at the information that's been given. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, Kelly.
Bye, everyone. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Gary.
Bye.
Bye.